Hey guys, I'm Darcy. This is episode 48. It's been a while since I published anything, but I've just finished filming with a guy called Peter. We just did a little movie together, so me and him just going to speak about anything. So pass it off to you, Peter.
Yeah, how you going? My name's Peter. For many years I was a bass player in various rock and roll bands in Sydney. None of them were particularly successful, but it was a good time back in those days when Sydney actually had a live music scene, and there were places like the Sydney Trade Union Club or the Strawberry Hills Hotel, and it was just a great part because you had singer-songwriters writing about Australia and this great country, and it was such an important part for those people who are like my age or old enough to remember that period. I just what it meant to have those great memories of seeing bands at various venues, having following, seeing, and I played in many bands in that sort of period from the 1980s up until about the 1990s, etc., when there was a live music scene. But as we know, society has changed. The live music scene is gone now. In basically, it's gone. Pubs have been knocked down. I think it's just very sad now that we do have Australian music, but it's just not based the way it was with the whole idea of the pubs and the guitars and the following and the circuit that was that I think gave many people my age a great deal of pleasure. I mean, obviously now we've still got Triple J, but as my son, who I tried to get him to listen to Triple J, my son thought they just don't, which is sort of funny because that was the youth radio station. I actually listen to more Triple J now than my kids ever did, which always felt as a bit of a failing as a parent. To bring your kids up wanting to listen to Australian music and they don't like listening to Triple J. But that's okay, they can make up their own minds as to what they want to do. But now, as we know, music has sort of gone via the internet, it's streaming, it's Spotify, and I just think it's lacked that sort of hands on beers, rock and roll approach. I suppose that's life, but I think it was part of what it meant to be an Australian was to enjoy music, not necessarily in the 80s, but in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in that pub rock type of environment.
So what kind of bands you like or musicians you like to listen to?
Well, I'm sort of fairly old school, so I try to listen to the classics. Like, I really love Jimi Hendrix. I love the Beatles, of course. They transcend time. I really like a sort of Australian music from that period. I mean, I sort of always like Midnight Oil. Didn't like Paul Kelly all that much. I've lost friends over that, but I didn't really like Paul Kelly. But always liked the band The Church. Steve Kilbey, Marty Wilson Piper, Peter Coppers. I always thought they were writing some really good quality guitar based music. And I actually saw The Church last year. Steve Kilby's out there. He's got a new sort of lineup with the band. None of the original guys are left. But I've always liked The Church as well. And I'm sort of actually, because I listen to Triple J, I'm sort of listening to people like Flume. I didn't know is Flume a musician? Is he a computer guy? What is Flume? But nevertheless, I still enjoy his music. And another band that I get excited over is a band called the Middle Kids, who I've sort of haven't seen live, but when I hear their songs on the radio on Triple J, I think, yeah, that's a band that deserves to have greater success and go somewhere, if you know what I mean. Amel and the Sniffers, I sort of listen to them as well when they're on Triple J as well. They're sort of in your face, but that's okay. Music, it's good that music can be in your face. Yeah. So there are some people I listen to now. Yeah.
So do you prefer music live or recorded or?
Um, when I was younger, so much younger than today. That's a John Lennon Beatles reference. I did like the live music scene. I think now, as you get a bit older, the whole idea of actually going to a gig and sort of lining up, it becomes a bit more of a problematic. I mean, I still like going. As I said, I saw The Church last year, and showing my age, bear with me, I'm not young. I went to see 1927 and Boom Crash Opera last month at the Factory Theatre there. So I still enjoy live music, but when I was younger, I'd go and see it a lot more often now, lot more regularly, 3 or 4 nights a week, because a lot of gigs were free back in those days if you were just starting off. So I still like going to live music, but as now I sort of listen to a bit more Spotify and things like that, just more convenient than what it was, yeah. Than buying CDs for those of us who can remember buying CDs, which wasn't all that long ago. We thought the CD would last forever. It'd be like the cockroach. It'd survive everything, but no, the CD's come and gone. But so yeah, I like a combination, but it's more listening now than actually going to see live bands.
And what about, is it just music or what other artistic forms do you like to seek
Well,
person from?
only recently, and I mean recently, last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing some extras work. Being a bass player and playing in bands, when COVID struck, I sort of said, "Oh, that's sort of it," as the whole idea of playing in live music. But I thought, "Oh, what am I going to do that's some sort of creative outlet, meeting different people?" And I thought, well, why don't I just put my name down and do some extra work in various films? I mean, I've done some things for short films, for afters, the Australian Film Radio, things like that. Just wanting to help out other people who've got a vision and passion and be able to assist. And they always treat you very well. You know, they sort of say welcome on set and things like that. That just gives me some sort of artistic outlet to not necessarily think in a particular sphere, like in a professional sense, in a job where you've got rules and regulations, but just to be a little bit creative, to work with different people, with different ideas, to see how people are working, the vision they've got. So I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years. It's really been quite good. It gets me out of the house. It gets me to meet people like Darcy. It makes me do podcasts. And also, you know, it's just nice seeing yourself on the big screen a little bit to sort of say, there I am, see that behind that car over there, yeah, that sort of stuff. So that's what I do as an artistic outlet. So I haven't really playing in bands now for 4 or 5 years, but this is something that just keeps me motivated, keeps me interested. So yeah, I enjoy it.
Now, what kind of movies? I know you said documentaries early, but what kind of movies and docos do you like to? What's your preference and what do you like to watch and stuff?
Well, I've always been when it comes to films, I've always been a great Stanley Kubrick fan. I mean, he was a guy born in 1927, only made about 13 or 14 films, but all of them you could arguably say are masterpieces in filmmaking. His production, his style, you know, whether it be things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which from 1968 was sort of cutting edge. That was the Star Wars type in the 60s. He was doing things with that film there, which I thought was, you know, very impressive. I mean, I've seen A Clockwork Orange, which obviously is a masterpiece, a brutal, violent masterpiece, but nevertheless, it has its artistic merits. Of course, The Shining with Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. I think it is that great scene where here's Johnny. I mean, it sort of transcends cinema, as well as Spartacus and the controversy of Lolita. So I sort of like the classics. I went to see recently. I went to see the Hadeum there at Cremorne. Went to see The Last Waltz, Martin Scorsese's musical film, which I hadn't seen at all, featuring the last concert from the band 1976. It was Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, a couple other people. So it's sort of like those types of films. I'm not too big on what's gone out recently. I find it hard to get emotionally involved with some of the special effects of you know, various Spider-Man films. I know they've got their qualities, but I find it hard to emotionally engage with them. But they're there. But I sort of still like the classics. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And what about documentaries?
Oh well, I sort of like a lot of documentaries on SBS. I think they do documentaries as well as things on Netflix. You've got to pick and choose, of course. But I think Netflix do a pretty good job. I haven't got, you know, the vast amounts of streaming services, but the ones I've seen at Netflix have been well produced, interviewing the people that matter, great scores musically as well. And they cover a couple, you know, it's very quite sociological, quite a lot of history there. I saw one on RFK, Robert Francis Kennedy's assassination, 1968. The challenge of that last flight, for those of us who can remember that, and the shock of seeing after 72 seconds, the challenge of blowing up in air, was sort of like a where were you moment very much of the 1980s. And so I've seen a couple of those ones on SBS. There's actually, if you're in Australia, and there's that film, one about Larrimah, which is a town in the Northern Territory with a population of 12, and a guy who just in 2017 called Paddy Moriarty, who just sort of left and assumedly has been killed or murdered, and how the town of 12 people responded to that. That was, if you understand Australian culture, you'll love it. Some of the people there, that sort of quintessential crocodile John D type of person, oh, you may have a few beers, you know, that sort of stuff. That was pretty impressive, just to see what people were like that arguably aren't like us, and how they've dealt with this spotlight of this town of 12 people having all the media attention. That was on Netflix. That was pretty good. That's only a 2-part series, but nevertheless, I'd recommend that if you've got Netflix. As I said, there is some pretty good stuff out there. I succumb. I'm sorry. I asked for forgiveness. I saw Megan and Harry. I watched all 6 episodes. Sorry about that. Shame, Peter, shame. But no, I just wanted to see what it was like. I mean, Harry had just wanted his scene. But I haven't read the book Spare, but I thought it was just interesting seeing more about her, how they came together, got married, how it all sort of arguably fell apart or has continued to fall apart. Oh, that was, once again, pretty interesting as well.
What about like paintings or books and stuff of that nature?
I've got a confession. I've only ever read 22 books in my entire life.
Yeah. Or name a couple or something.
Well, at high school, I read. You had to read sort of books for the HSC. One of the books it really is one of the great novels of the 20th century, is George Orwell's 1984. I read that at high school, and I thought, wow, what a book that's going to tell us more about the future and what that means. That was I'm so glad I've read George Orwell 84. I've seen the film which came out. We had to I think see it for the HSC, starring Richard Burton. I think it was. It came out in the early 80s or thereabouts. But Orwell, I mean Eric Blair, what a master. And also Animal Farmers. We read that about all pigs are equal, but some are more. How true is that in today's society? That line, all pigs are equal, but some are more equal than others, just sort of transcends time, and it's still being played out in various scenarios around the world in our personal relationships, etc. So those are the two books that I thought when I was studying them were icons. Actually, I really enjoyed T.S. Eliot. I mean, I don't know if you followed T.S. Eliot. September.
The Hollow Man.
Yes, well, September the 26th, 1880 to the 4th of January 1965. I know that because Eliot I loved, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Let me just quote you the first 2 lines, a couple of lines. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is stretched out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. I love that poem. Do I dare to eat a peach, to walk along the beach till human voices wake us and we drown? I mean, what an iconic poem that really defined the early part of poetry in the 20th century, the Hollow Man. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. And how true is that in various aspects of life? It's not the bang, it's the whimper that defines things or in our lives. So I loved Eliot. I thought he was a guy that Rhapsody on a Windy Night. I studied him, and I loved him. I thought he was fantastic, as he is a genius of poetry in the 20th century.
What about Shakespeare? You were saying something about him before.
Yes, well, naturally I had to study Shakespeare for the HSC. Who did I study? I think it was it The Merchant of Venice or Othello? I mean, I was seeing a documentary on ABC on iView, and they were interviewing Judi Dench and various other great thespians, and they were saying, you look at his style, the tragedy, the love, the conflict. He said no one does it better than William S. And I'd have to say, I'm not an expert, I'm not really into Shakespeare, but as you could say, he is a genius that will continue to transcend time. Just so many things that are common language come back from Shakespeare, to be or not to be, all those types of things. You think he created that man. This one man has so defined literature around the world. Yes, but I haven't seen any of his plays. Personally, I just find it a bit hard to follow because the language, unless of course you're into it, you've got to read up to see who's this, who's doing that, who says, to understand what's really going on. But the fact they're still doing his plays after 500 years just suggests what a genius he is and how he's shaped the literature around the world.
Now, what about since we're on the subject of culture? Tell me about. Have you done any travels or anything like that? Interstate or overseas? Either one.
Well, actually, for those of us who get married, right, it's always a bit of give and take. You don't sort of set the agenda. So we sort of have 2 types of holidays, right? One of those holidays that my wife likes is along the seaboard, near the water, nicer places. But for me, that's not my holiday. My holiday is going out west to rural New South Wales. As a father, I said to my kids, I want to take you to every town in Western New South Wales. And luckily for them, I failed. But one of the great things about going out west is just places like, when I mean west, I mean places like Hay, or out, out to Ivanhoe or Bulligal, all those places. When I think of Bulligal, you think about that Banjo Patterson poem, Hell, Hay and Bulligal. Going out west, just seeing a different type of environment, people living different types of lifestyles. We're not necessarily motivated strictly by wealth or views or high rise or property investments. They're just sort of people just living their lives in a far simpler way. West Wyalong, Temora, all those types of places. I mean, we went out there so often. My daughter sort of said, "Dad, why can't we go to a holiday destination that other people have heard of?" Because let's face it, who's been out to Bulligal or Ivanhoe for holidays? But just going out to Broken Hill and seeing the history of that place, the mining, although I think it was just good to know who we are, because we're largely now just seaboard. We live in cities on the seaboards. We sometimes holiday on the coast, going up to Cairns or the theme parks. Actually go out here and see what Australia is like, that sort of desert that I love, a sunburnt country. And people ask me, if you had to go to one place out of all of Western New South Wales, when in Western New South Wales, I mean west of the Great Divide, western, say, Bathurst or Lithgow, heading out there, one of the great places I'd recommend anyone is to actually go to Lightning Ridge, because you've got the mines there, you've got the opals, you've got so many idiosyncratic people there. They've got the hot baths out there, just to the geography. That's one place where I thought, if I had to choose one place, it's a bit of a fair way to get out to, but nevertheless, Lightning Ridge is a place that it was just so iconic, and what you're seeing there, you just don't really see anywhere else in New South Wales. So that's one place I'd recommend to you. If you've got that bucket list and it's got 10 things on it, put number 11, go to Lightning Ridge.
What about any overseas trips or anything?
To be honest, I did a red gum, went to Bali. So that was when I was a bit younger. But I also went to the South Island of New Zealand. So I know I've also been to the North Island. But I would recommend just, it sounds like a cliche. You've got to go there. Just the geography, everywhere you turn, there's some beautiful mountain, some beautiful lake, some beautiful waterfall. And you're not sort of driving 5 or 6 hours to get there. It is just so brilliant. You don't really see that in Australia, except for perhaps Tasmania. But even Tasmania is just a little version of what you see in the South Island of New Zealand. And also, if you had the opportunity, catching a cruise, we did a cruise in there to Milford Sound, and just to be able to go in there on a cruise ship and just see the beauty of Milford Sound. It's stunning. If you get the opportunity to do that, the South Island is, I hire a car, fly into Dunedin or Christchurch and drive around. I mean, it's spectacular. It's a cliche, but you've got to do it. You've just got to do it. Go to the South Island of New Zealand.
What's some we'll do both. Similarities and differences between Australians and New Zealand.
The countries.
Yeah, between the people.
Well, the New Zealanders never let us forget the underarm bowling incident of the 1st of February 1981. Everywhere you go, they still talk about it. It was in the underarm, Trevor Chapel. That'll keep on going. It's got another 50 years in it. I mean, that happened, 40 years ago now? But the people basically are quintessentially the same, It's pretty much similar culture. Both of us sort of like our sport. We both look after tourists. We know the importance of tourism. People are pretty much, I was actually surprised just how few people live in New Zealand. I thought it'd be like 10 million, but there's only about 5 million people.
Just under 5.
Yeah, which I thought, when you think about it.
Sydney alone's bigger.
Yeah, the population of Sydney constitutes New Zealand. I thought, when I didn't realise that all the time, I thought it'd be like 10 million people, but it's actually relatively small population-wise. But the people are very nice. I mean, obviously, we went up to did Auckland, that sort of stuff. Went up to the top part of New Zealand as well. Once again, we did a bus trip up there as well. So there's lots to see and do there. And as I said, you've got Windy Wellington with the cable cars. You've got Auckland, population of 1 million people there. But yeah, it's a bit colder. But yeah, I mean, you've got to go. The people are basically pretty much the same, except they like to remind us that we haven't had the Bladders loaf for 20 years. They
No.
never miss that.
Yeah,
You
the
know,
rugby,
these
yeah.
awful Aussies, woeful Wallabies, they never forget the underarm bowling incident and how superior they are at rugby union.
Yeah. I think you can't, yeah. If you want your kid to be a good rugby player, have your kids in New Zealand.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, yeah, it's just it's a mindset and a passion that you don't really see, arguably, in Australian sport. You know, it's like Brazil has its soccer, New Zealand have the All Blacks. And to be honest, they've been a great national team now for about a century, really. They first played rugby union over 100 years ago, and to have a national team that has arguably been the dominant team and arguably ruled the sport for over 100 years or thereabouts, that's pretty impressive for a country, as we've discussed, less than 5 million people.
yeah. All right, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there.